So, you're diving headfirst into the world of drones, huh? And I bet you're finding out pretty quickly that the FAA rulebook, well, it ain't exactly beach reading material,
It's a bit of a doozy, isn't it?
eh,
Lot to unpack.
to say the least. But that's why we're here, right? To break it all down, make sense of the madness.
Exactly. We'll be your guides to navigating the wild world of drone regulations.
And believe me, when it comes to these regs, not all drone flights are created equal. You've got your hobbyists just out there having a blast, and then you've got folks using drones professionally. So before we even get into the weeds of specific rules, let's talk about when those rules actually apply.
Your spot-on intent is key here.
Hmm.
The FAA draws a thick, bright line between flying for fun and flying for any sort of commercial reason.
It's all about the bottom line, right?
In a way, yeah. If you're making money, even potentially, the FAA sees it as a whole different ballgame. More risk involved.
Our sources actually highlight a really interesting scenario. Picture this. You're out hiking, snapping some epic drone shots, just for your own memories, right? And suddenly, bam, you accidentally capture a rock slide on camera. Turns out the local news is willing to pay top dollar for that footage. Are you in the clear, or are you about to get slapped with a fine?
You're totally in the clear.
Yeah.
Because your original intent was purely recreational, the fact that you could make a few bucks off that footage, it doesn't magically transform you into a commercial operator in the eyes of the FAA.
That's a relief. But let's flip the script for a sec. Say, instead of a rock slide, you're intentionally filming that hike, but this time it's for your travel blog, the one you're hoping will rake in those sweet, sweet ad dollars. Now we're in different territory, right?
Bingo. Once there's any whiff of business involved, whether you're filming for a client, conducting inspections, even just posting to your monetized YouTube channel, you're stepping into what the FAA calls Part 107 territory.
And from what I'm gathering from these FAA documents, Part 107 is where things get real.
It's definitely where the rubber meets the road.
So, for all our listeners out there who are officially flying in Part 107, airspace filmmakers, inspectors, aspiring drone delivery giants, the first question we've got to address is, do you really, truly need a Part 107 certificate? Or can you, maybe just wing it?
Oh, the FAA is crystal clear on this one. If you're engaging in any type of commercial drone operation, that certificate, my friend, is non-negotiable.
No ifs, ands, or buts.
Well, there is one exception, unless you're being directly supervised by someone who already holds a Part 107 certificate.
So there's hope for the uncertified yet. Just gotta find yourself a certified buddy.
Hold your horses. It's not as simple as like having your certified pal stand next to you while you fly. We're talking strict requirements here, things like buddy box systems, where the certified pilot can take over control of the drone instantly if needed.
Wow, so the FAA isn't messing around. They want someone with the knowledge and experience at the controls, literally or figuratively.
You got it. They're serious about safety.
It's all about dotting those I's and crossing those T's, isn't it? But you know what they say, the devil's in the details. Speaking of details, our sources are chock full of these little gotchas, those sneaky things that might not jump out at you from the regulations, but can really trip you up if you're not careful.
Oh, absolutely. It's like you think you've got a handle on things, and then bam, some obscure rule catches you off guard.
Exactly. And when it comes to drone regulations, those nuances can mean the difference between a successful flight and, well, a not so successful one. Take the FAA's fondness for calendar months, for instance.
Oh yeah, don't get caught slipping on those renewal deadlines.
36 months might seem like 3 years, but in the FAA's world, they're not playing the same game.
Nope, they're two different things entirely. Mark those calendars carefully, folks, or you might find yourself grounded when you least expect it.
And remember that condition for safe operation rule we touched on earlier. It's not just about making sure your drone is in tip-top shape, right?
It's also about you, the pilot, being in the right condition to fly.
It's like the FAA saying, hey, we get it. You're stoked to get your drone in the air, but maybe, just maybe, save it for another day if you had a wild night out.
Exactly. Feeling a little under the weather, maybe you had a few too many cups of coffee, or how about that, don't operate heavy machinery, warning on your allergy meds? Yeah, that applies to drones too.
Makes sense.
You're the one calling the shots up there, and your judgment needs to be firing on all cylinders.
Speaking of judgment, let's talk about something no one likes to think about, but we have to have accidents. Because, let's face it, they do happen. So what are the crucial things our listeners need to know about reporting those, oh no moments?
Well, first and foremost, anytime there's property damage exceeding $500, you're obligated to file a report with the FAA. And you've got a limited window to do it 10 days, to be exact. But here's the kicker, and this is super important. Certain types of incidents require immediate reporting.
Like what? Give us the rundown.
We're talking situations involving serious injury or, even worse, a collision with a manned aircraft.
Okay, yeah, those sound pretty intense.
Definitely not something you want to be dragging your feet on reporting. The FAA means business, and a timely report is essential.
So we've laid some groundwork here. We've talked about when these regulations even come into play, the importance of having your certification and registration squared away, and even those unwritten rules that can trip you up. But now it's time to really dive into the nitty-gritty, the specific rules that people seem to get hung up on the most.
Let's do it. Hit me with your best shot.
All right, let's kick things off with a big one. Alcohol and drugs.
Ah, yes, the classic buzzkill.
We know party pooper alert. But the FAA, they're not messing around with this one.
And for good reasons, safety is paramount here, folks. 8 hours, bottle to throttle, just like it is for those flying those big old planes. And here's something most people don't realize. If you refuse to take a drug or alcohol test, guess what?
What's that?
It's considered the same as failing one.
Yikes. So yeah, if you're planning to fly, maybe skip the happy hour the night before.
Probably a good call. Now, speaking of things that might impair your judgment, let's talk about night flying.
Night flying. Sounds simple enough, right? Wait for the sun to set and you're good to go.
Not so fast. It's a bit more nuanced than that. The FAA has very specific rules about what they call civil twilight.
Civil twilight? What even is that?
Basically, it's those periods 30 minutes before sunrise and after sunset. Even if it's not pitch blackout, those twilight hours come with their own set of restrictions.
Like what? Fill us in.
Well, for starters, you're going to need to deck out your drone with proper anti-collision lighting. And depending on your specific operation, you might even need to undergo additional training specifically for night flying.
This is where those handy-dandy cheat sheets our sources provided come in super clutch. Because, let's be real, who can keep all these details straight?
Seriously, having a quick reference guide out there in the field, it's a lifesaver. Speaking of things you need to keep in sight, let's chat about visual line of sight.
Ah, yes, good old VLOS. This is a big one for drone pilots, especially those who love their FPV goggles.
Oh yeah, those first-person view goggles talk about an adrenaline rush. You feel like you're right there in the cockpit.
But those goggles, they don't exactly jive with the FAA's definition of visual line of sight, do they?
Not quite. As cool as FPV goggles are, the FAA is pretty clear that you need to have an actual, real-life human observer who can physically see the drone unaided at all times during the flight.
So FPV pilots, sounds like you need a trusty sidekick if you want to stay on the right side of the FAA. One to fly, one to keep those peepers on the prize. All right, next rule in our rapid-fire rundown, and I think I can already guess the answer to this one, hazardous materials. Safe to say that's a no-fly zone?
You could definitely say that again. The FAA, they don't mess around when it comes to hazardous materials, and their definition is, well, it's pretty broad.
So we're talking explosives, chemicals, radioactive stuff, basically anything that could turn a routine drone flight into a Michael Bay film.
Pretty much. Leave the risky business to the experts, folks.
Yeah.
All right, let's tackle another topic, and this one can get a little hairy. People and vehicles.
Yeah, our sources, they lay out a whole laundry list of categories and subcategories for this one.
A lot to wrap your head around.
This really is. So for our listeners who are still with us, bless your hearts, what are the need-to-know points here?
The biggest thing to remember is that the weight of your drone, it's a major factor in where and how you can fly around people and moving vehicles.
So the bigger the drone, the stricter the rules.
You got it. Lighter drones, they've got a bit more wiggle room, but there's still rules, and they're there to keep everyone safe. So no, you probably shouldn't be buzzing your buddy's convertible with your drone, even if it's the size of a dragonfly.
Probably for the best. Safety first, folks.
Always. And when it comes to flying over people, the FAA, they make a clear distinction between, say, the folks who are directly involved in your drone operation and those unsuspecting souls just going about their day.
So, like, if you're on set filming a movie with your drone, the actors and crew, they're fair game, but the random guy walking his dog down the street, not so much.
Exactly. You wouldn't want someone wandering into a drone landing zone unawares, right?
Makes sense to me. Now, our sources, they also mention something called open-air assemblies. What's the deal with those?
Ah, yes, open-air assemblies. Think concerts, sporting events, those massive farmers markets. Those are a whole other ballgame, my friend, a whole different set of rules.
And lucky for us, our sources provided a super handy cheat sheet on this one.
It's a good one to keep bookmarked, for sure. But the main takeaway here is, when it comes to flying around people in vehicles, err on the side of caution, Don't push your luck.
And when in doubt, consult those FAA documents.
Always a good idea.
Speaking of navigating the finer points of drone regulations, let's touch on those times when you might need a little flexibility. We're talking about waivers.
Ah, yes, waivers. The get-out-of-jail-free card of the drone world.
Well, not quite that simple, right?
Not quite. So here's the thing. Waivers, they exist for almost every rule in Part 107. But getting one? Well, it's not as simple as just shooting the FAA an email and saying, pretty please. You really got to make your case.
So you need to prove you're not just some reckless pilot trying to bend the rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to show them you've carefully considered all the risks, you've taken every precaution, and you have a rock-solid reason for needing that waiver.
It's about demonstrating a deep understanding of the rules, not just trying to skirt around them. But waivers, that's a whole other can of worms, and I think we might need a dedicated deep dive for that topic alone.
I'm with you. There's a lot to unpack there.
So let's shift gears a bit and move beyond Part 107. We got to talk about a few more things our listeners should be aware of. First up, the NTSB.
The National Transportation Safety Board. They're the folks who investigate those uh-oh moments.
Yeah.
The accidents.
Exactly. And they've got their own set of rules and definitions that every drone pilot, no matter how experienced, should be familiar with.
One thing that often trips people up is the NTSB's definition of serious injury. It's more comprehensive than you might think.
Yeah, our sources mention severe burns as one example.
Definitely highlights the importance of treating every flight with the utmost care and attention to safety.
Absolutely. Now let's switch gears again, this time to something that might be particularly relevant to our international drone enthusiasts out there. Registration quirks.
Ah, yes. So according to these documents, if you've got a drone that's already registered in another country, well, you can't register in the U.S. too.
So no dual citizenship for drones.
Afraid not. Just something to bear in mind if you're planning on, say, traveling with your drone, or maybe expanding your drone business across international borders.
Yeah.
Speaking of registration, remember that little detail about renewal periods we talked about earlier?
3 years, not 36 months.
It's easy to get tripped up on the wording. And speaking of things that might trip you up, let's wrap up by touching on a new development in the drone world that's just on the horizon. Remote ID.
Ah, yes, the license plate for your drone. It's been in the works for a while, and it sounds like it's going to be a game changer in the world of drone regulations.
Big time. Basically, remote ID is a system that will require drones to broadcast specific identifying information while in flight. Think of it like an electronic license plate that's beaming out your drone's location, altitude, even its takeoff point.
And anyone with a smartphone can see this information.
Not exactly. The FAA, they'll have access to the full shebang, of course, along with law enforcement. But for us regular folks, we'll only be able to see the basics, like the drone's registration number.
So it's like a digital fingerprint, but with some privacy settings in place.
Precisely. It's a balancing act between keeping things transparent and respecting everyone's privacy.
Well, folks, there you have it. We covered a ton of ground today. From the nitty-gritty of FAA regulations to the brave new world of remote ID, it's clear that the drone landscape is anything but static.
It's constantly evolving, that's for sure. And as drone technology keeps advancing, we can expect the rules of the game to keep changing right along with it.
Truer words have never been spoken. So, to our listeners out there who are now likely feeling like they've just been through drone boot camp, remember, knowledge is power. What we covered today, it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Don't underestimate the power of those resources we shared.
Seriously, folks, dive into those FAA documents, bookmark those cheat sheets, make them your new best friends, because at the end of the day, it's all about staying informed, staying safe, and keeping those drones flying high.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that's it for this deep dive. Until next time, happy flying, everyone.